Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other perspicacious host,
Brian. Hi, how's it going? I think you've used that one before, maybe.
I definitely haven't, because I only remembered it from an episode of Jeopardy that we saw last week.
What's it mean?
It means having a great insight into things.
Oh, okay. Well.
So, no pressure.
Alright, do you want a Buffy on summary?
Please, kick me off.
Okay, so this is Seeing Red. It's season 6, episode 9. It was first aired on May 7th, 2002. It was directed by Michael Gershman, who last directed Older and Far Away, and it was written by Stephen S. DeKnight, who last wrote... Wait, I said directed and then wrote... Anyway, wrote Dead Things. This is the final episode, written by Stephen S. DeKnight. And here is your Buffy on summary. The Troika kill a demon for spheres, which make the bearer super strong. Warren beats up Xander until prevented by Jonathan. Spike confronts Buffy in her bathroom and ends up attempting rape. He leaves Sunnydale. During a robbery, Warren beats up Buffy until Jonathan tips her off to break the spheres. Warren escapes. The other two are arrested. Warren turns up in the morning and shoots Buffy. A ricochet kills Tara and Willow and becomes magically, murderously angry. So...
We might start off just given the unusual significance of this episode with a couple of things. So as we mentioned previously, we won't be doing any bronze banters. Closed for pesticides. What's that? For fumigation? Closed for fumigation.
Yeah, sure.
And also, as you might expect, if you either seen the episode recently or remember it in any detail, some content warnings for this episode. There is obviously going to be discussion of a number of the challenging things happening in this episode, along with sexual assault, just general misogyny and queer death and things along those lines.
Yeah, I would say, we're probably going to be discussing homophobia. So yeah, we often discuss homophobia. So I mean, you're probably reasonably used to it at this point. There
is no laugh track for this episode.
No, there isn't, and it's going to be so awkward when I try to come up with a funny thing to rate the episode on. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it's, if you're not going to have a fun time today because you're listening to this episode, maybe don't, just, it's no big deal to skip something because you're like, oh gosh, I don't feel like listening to content that is going to make me feel crap.
Yeah.
So yeah, give yourself a break. Go get a coffee, go get a tea, and
come back to it in the future when you're in the right frame of mind. So that's a nice soft exit, I think.
Yeah, well. or never come back to it. Never come back to our podcast and stop looking at us. I hate it when people listen to our podcast.
Please don't go. And the other thing which I think we want to just signpost early on is that this is probably one of the most discussed, arguably controversial episodes of Buffy.
It's maybe the most controversial episode of a TV show ever aired.
Yeah. So what I want to set as a intention for this episode is that we do not have the answer. We do not have the definitive take on Seeing Red. We have a number of opinions, as we are wont to do, and perspectives on how this episode reads in 2021. Mm-hmm. But this is, I think, one of the most salient things about this episode is there isn't really, I think, a conclusive take on this. I think it is a collection of a lot of stuff going on, and we are not going to solve it over the next 45 minutes.
No, and it's worth bearing in mind that this episode, specifically upon initial release, was incredibly controversial. It was kind of it had a lot of the scene was really properly set for it to be controversial, in the sense that Mark Field goes into this extensively in his book about Buffy, where because his background is Buffy via internet boards. So he starts by saying that initially, that obviously Buffy was the original online discussed TV show. Mm-hmm. It's the origin of TV tropes as a website. Yeah. Potentially the most influential TV criticism, I would say, website. And obviously there was the initial reaction to Tara as a character was very much confusion and some negativity, but people came to really like her. And especially there's one specific lesbian Buffy board, I think it was called Bewitched. So it's a pun on pun on the line The Witch in the Wardrobe. I can't remember exactly what it is, but a hugely influential forum where a lot of Willow and Tara affection congregated. In addition to that, obviously, Buffy and Spike as a couple, like, I would argue probably originated on the basis of fan feedback. People felt like they had loads of chemistry, and they got put together on that basis, I think, to some degree. Because I think in terms of the storyline, I don't think it makes a huge amount of sense. So I think it is very much influenced by that. So between those two things, given it just meant that this was a very explosive moment. Also, the episode feature was leaked extensively. So
it was broadcast to affiliates. And
it was broadcast
by mistake.
Affiliates in Canada a week early. So it was available to download online. I think it was also leaked by like a very like influential leaker on that lesbian Buffy or queer women Buffy forum, and that really kind of cemented it as a, like, you know, people were open arms about this episode before they had seen it. A lot of people who were online Buffy people knew about what happened in this episode before sitting down to watch. So all those things combined means that this episode is like just rife with tension.
And we pre-gamed this a little bit, and I really want, I as I said to you, I don't have like I haven't seen Red 1,000 times. Do you know what I mean? I don't have like a really solidified opinion of it going into this viewing, and we pre-gamed and kind of realized there's kind of three quite volatile elements in this episode. One is Spike's sexual assault and attempted rape of Buffy, and the other is Tara's death, and them getting back together in this full bloom of queer love, and then her being murdered, and then just Warren's general explicit like I said misogyny, but there's a stronger word I'm looking for. Like, what is it? Like,
misogyny has a casual implication to it, as if it's like, you know, this kind of like deep-seated, like, you know, casual thing that happens throughout culture. Like, but like, I mean, this is like, it is the most virulent and self-assertive, assured, like, misogyny and woman hating, and
toxic, like predating, kind of like, as we've discussed before, the whole kind of like incel calcification of that. So that, but there's three really kind of challenging, like heavy things happening in this episode,
for sure.
So where do we want to start?
Well, one thing to say to start is that, like, you know, you were saying you don't have a specific experience with this episode. You feel like, like that's very likely because when this was originally aired in Ireland and the UK, it would have been on Sky, and I don't think BBC were airing Buffy by this point. I think Buffy only aired on Sky in season 6 and 7 because it moved to UPN and stuff. And maybe TV3. No, TV3 was always very big for behind.
See, I would immediately have to challenge that, because one of the notes about this is that the BBC was the one who made a lot of the cuts to the episode.
Oh, are you 100% sure? Because I'm pretty sure the phrase the one thing that I read said Sky, but specifically, as with the season opener, there were not just shots cut, but like there was a whole chunk taken out of the bathroom scene. After Buffy tears down the shower curtain, I believe it was cut from that point until the ad break. So all of the struggle, all of the kind of very clear attempts for Buffy to stop Spike doing what he's doing, it seems like that entirely was cut. And then the end of the episode with the blood splatter, I believe, also was cut. Which, again, the blood splatter, the shower scene, and the Warren flaying, all famously cut out of UK broadcasts of this show, and every single one of them constantly featured in previously on clips.
Yes, because those the purpose.
Because those weren't like trimmed out, so it was just very confusing.
The Wikipedia claims BBC, but it does say citation needed. So
okay,
sure.
Cool. So UK broadcasters. I just found it surprising when I read Sky, and it stuck in my brain because Sky is obviously a much more liberal and much less regulated broadcasting corporation.
So essentially, so we come to it. It's
we sound so fucking dour. Just we sound like we're like, okay, get ready for the scary episode of Buffy.
No, not scary as much as like I can really feel all the pistons in my brain firing as like I'm really trying to think about this. You know, and give it the
attention it deserves.
And try to view this storyline, say with Buffy and Spike, from first principles, as if I'm a new viewer going in, not with all this kind of like, you know, built up kind of history with it. And so we have this ongoing thing, which is in this kind of like safe or like will they, won't they / bag relationship space. We're up until the point in this episode where he is kind of out of favor again, but you know, and we have this like debate where she's talking to Xander, and it's like, he's like, how could you be with this disgusting thing which has no soul? And Buffy's like, you let him take care of Dawn, you know, while I was dead. And Dawn goes to visit him in the crypt, and it's like, you've really heard her, etc. So it's all in this kind of like soap opera space. And then this this kind of scene with Buffy and this attack on Buffy takes it to a very like not like a genre breaking space, I think, to a certain degree. It's an element of it's twisty and difficult for a couple of reasons. One is because they contrive a reason for why she isn't as powerful physically as she would be usually, because she's injured just before this attack happens. And that in itself is telling, because in a very legitimate and valuable way, like Buffy is a female and a feminist power fantasy. It's like, what if, you know, why can't what if the ability the woman has that is so often constrained by these kind of physical mores, like what if that wasn't the case, you know? And so in doing so, and putting her in this situation, it's to reduce that immediately and to create a slightly within the world of the show and the conventions of the show, an artificially introduced vulnerability for her. And the thing that I keep coming back to when I'm kind of watching the scene, and this is obviously the catalyst, you know, we're giving a deliberate sleight of hand with Spike at the end of the episode, because it suggests this is going to cause him to remove his chip and turn evil, but it's actually the catalyst for him to go and try to get his soul back, or get a soul back.
Which I always found a very confusing like sequence anyway, because it's not clear if he's fighting to get his chip out throughout the end of the season, or like when he says like, no, you know what I want or whatever, and they give him a soul. It's not clear if that's actually kind of like he's fought for that, or if he's fought for anyway. But see,
that's exactly it. It's like, from what I read and what I understand, that this was a deliberate misdirection. But to the extent that it becomes confusing. And similarly in this scene, is what I really came back to with this attack on Buffy is, was it worth it as a story moment? What was the point of it, and what were they trying to say? And I still don't understand what this scene is for.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. I would say that, like, you know, first off, yeah, the Spike stuff has just kind of come to a head. It's just like they've messed around with this. It's not so much that they've messed around with this, will they, won't they? It's like evil or naughty Spike. And it's like, you know, they've flirted with saying, you know, actually, no, there's this deep evil within Spike that, you know, comes out in different times. And and then other times he's actually the only solace that Buffy experiences. So you kind of have two conflicting things there, because with Spike you have this just badly written problem. You have this problem in your narrative at this point, and thankfully it is ironed out after this. You know, Spike having fought for his soul makes for narrative cleanliness, and it wraps things up nicely going forward, and it means that for season 7 the Spike issue is neutered in a positive way, but
and carrying on into Angel as well, because we have to deal with the fact that we have this character in the story going forward who has like done this irrevocably reprehensible thing, you know?
Yeah, and thankfully, like, you know, the thing about season 7 is that, like, you know, he does have a soul now. He feels bad for everything, and he is responsible, but he's a different character ultimately, in the same way that Angel and Angelus are separate entities.
And that is the convention we've always subscribed to, kind of metaphysically.
But then additionally, you have what you've done is you've mixed it into Spike being representative of Buffy's self-hatred and Buffy's pain in the season, where Buffy was punishing herself through her relationship with Spike and also finding solace. It's like, unfortunately, very classic self-harm narrative, where it's like, oh, I'm doing damage to myself and it's the only relief I'm experiencing. And if you combine those two things and say, like, you know, oh, we need Spike to have a motivation to find another way, or like, you know, we need to wrap it up with him and give him motivation to really seek a closure of this problem, and then mix it in with, oh, and be like, oh yeah, and Buffy also has been doing this thing. It's like, it's messy and crap. And the thing is, like, you know, we constantly talk about the implication of this for Spike and etc. and what it does mean for him. It rarely factors in for Buffy throughout the show, and it rarely factors into people's conversations around Buffy as a character. That's possibly because, like, she's very used to this at this point, as every Wikipedia for this episode notes and every trivia section. This is far from you. It's difficult to construe this as the first time that Buffy's been had sexual assault attempted on her in this show. Most notably, we identified in Go Fish. There'd be multiple times where she's been controlled in different ways. People have suggested that Faith's using Buffy's body to have sex with Riley is really gross, which I would
which is, I think like most genre conventions would construe that as a form of rape.
Or it's certainly a sexual violation. And, you know,
sexually harassing Ang and different things. So I actually found that very striking, which is like, we do crystallize this as, you know, the episode where Buffy is sexually assaulted by Spike, and that's like a notable departure, but like it's almost more
she takes in her stride, unfortunately, she is used to it.
It's something which happens de rigueur throughout the show in different ways, in more jokey or lighthearted episodes, because that is how, you know, women are required to
experience the world,
navigate the world.
And it's funny because, like, you know, there's two lines of thought there. One is that, like, you know, this is appropriate to communicate because it is what the show is fighting against. You know, it is what they're empowering Buffy to do, is to fight against this stuff, and she does fight against it, you know, and that's strong. But at the same time, like, you know, like, it's the Game of Thrones thing. It's like, you know, having your characters be sexually assaulted to give another character a emotional cathartic moment or develop their storyline. It's like, you know, it's for one thing a cliche, so that's bad writing in itself, and it's also just, it's a gross thing writing wise, and it is just, it doesn't sit right in our current society, thankfully. Maybe there'd be a point where, like, you know, it's not a cliche and it's like used in, no, you see, I don't know. It's a funny one, because obviously to have characters realize the depths to which they've sunk, it's almost always doing harm to others. And just that, and when you get into issues of responsibility in representation and responsibility in the content you're delivering and how damaging it might be to your viewers, it's all a messy, gross thing. But ultimately, it's I feel like it just the clash of Buffy's approach this season, Spike's approach, which has been, like, you know, like, Spike has basically been non-present this season. He has been whatever the narrative is needed of him, and in this moment, you know, they need him to become something again. So they're like, evil, rapist, and now like, you know, gone. You know, I think
absolutely. I think it's interesting what you kind of say about, you know, in our current society, because I think really, I don't think anyone's naive enough to say that, we've just realized in the last 5 or 10 years that these things are bad or these things are happening. But it's more that we've really drawn focus in on the fact that kind of classic perspectives on it, or historical perspectives on it, or conventions, like narratives like this in shows, are also a much bigger part of the problem in terms of normalizing jokes or storylines about this as having worth or value in a way that they just don't. They're just lazy. They're just you know, it's not that there can't be a valuable storyline that involves sexual assault, but critically, if you're going to go there and use that and draw from that and benefit from it narratively, it has to be from the perspective of the person it's happened to, and it has to have value to them as a character or as a storyteller. And there have been some fantastic things written which use it in a way which is authentic and it's from the person's perspective. So like, it's absolutely, it's not, I'm always so wary of like, let's just never talk about it. But like, as you said, this is a classic case of, this does nothing for Buffy as a character, this does something for Spike.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I think there's actually very much a way to write a storyline about the rapists. It's been done. Like, you know, if you look at the Kevin Bacon movie in 2005, The Woodsman, which is about Kevin Bacon's character as a paedophile and how he like deeply regrets his actions, experiences this incredible trauma from his childhood, and actively trying to improve himself, and looking at the impact of his actions and the horror of it. It's grueling and incredibly awful, but like, and the narrative at no point suggests that he's a sympathetic or an okay character. Now, this is all bearing in mind, I haven't seen The Woodsman since I'd say 2008 or something, or 2007. But so my recollection of it could be off there. But at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, if you want to go there, if you want to write a story and say, let's look at the rapist's perspective as we're doing here, which is Spike, and look at the impact it has on Spike. My God, like, you know, what are you inviting into your narrative, and what are you inviting into your audience, and are you going to look at that in its full extent? Because the show doesn't, and most things don't. And yeah, I mean, like, look at I May Destroy You. That is, which you didn't watch. It's hugely worth a watch. I believe it's just come to HBO in America in the last month or so, and it's one of the best things I've watched in recent years, I'd say. All around, it's a rape narrative, and it is incredible in every way, and it is incredibly empowering and in no way punishing of its main character. This show doesn't do that. I think we are looking at it to some degree through the lens of, I mean, like, realistically, in 2002, rape as content was less well dealt with because rape was everywhere in society and so prevalent, and as it is now.
But it's normalized to a much more conversational degree.
100% that, you know, like, it was more normalized, but also like the actual implications of it were totally ignored. That, like, you know, it was a perfect storm for just like, oh, everything about this is fucked. You know, so I don't think that this show should have cured society of its rape epidemic, you know, or its the horrors of it. But I think it did a bad job to some degree. I think it doesn't stand up.
Here's something I want to introduce, right? And this is from the Buffy Wikipedia pages from an interview that James Marsters did in 2012. You might have seen this already. Yeah. Which I just think is an interesting data point, right? According to Marsters, he understood that the bathroom scene came from a female writer who had a situation in her life.
Marty Noxon, by the way, is the person, yeah.
Who had a situation where she was and her boyfriend were breaking up, and she decided if she just made love to him one more time that they wouldn't break up. So she ended up trying to force herself on him and decided to write about that. But if you flip that gender-wise, it becomes a whole different thing, and I'm not really sure it expressed what the author was intending or was successful in that score. That quote from James Marsters. I'm not saying that's a solution or Rosetta Stone to this, but I think the fact that there's that energy and that perspective in it, there's the fact that Sarah Michelle Gellar and James Marsters at various points over the years have been, you know, uncomfortable and regretful about it, or like not really known. No, I've been like, you know, with the Tara stuff, you know, which we're going to come to, like, Amber Benson has, like, I think a very clear sense of it, you know. With this scene, everyone kind of like doesn't really want to look at it very much, because like whatever was going on here, all the different things at play, like, it just comes back to me that if you want to do this, you need to be rock solid on why, you need to know what you're saying, and you need to execute it in a way which is clear to the audience, and that this is too messy, I think, to have been worth the harm it caused, you know?
Yeah, it's also just like, it's so clearly a painful scene in the way it's framed, even, like, you know, it's a pained and uncomfortable scene. Like, it's shaky cams, it's like handheld camera photography throughout. It's bright in a way that Buffy never is, you know. It's kind of clinically white. It is like slow and very like
it's excruciating.
It's excruciating in the same way that, like, you know, the final scene of the episode is where you have Willow and Tara discussing something that isn't relevant to the plot, which so rarely happens. They're kind of just like chatting and like, oh, what's that at the window? And it all feels out of place and uncomfortable and sad. Anyway, I have a bit to read here from Rhonda Wilcox's book, Why Buffy Matters, just about the about this whole shtick, I suppose. So yeah, she says, Buffy and Spike's sexual encounters have been repeatedly depicted in a violent fashion, but the difference in emotion here is made clear by a simple but effective device. In Smashed, they break down the walls, both metaphoric and physical, to the accompaniment of vocalized music, which is almost poignant in tone. There is no music in the cold light of the bathroom scene and of seeing red. We hear only the sounds of the attack. And no visual darkness in Buffy has approached the grimness of this brightly lit scene. Hurt by an early encounter with a vampire and apparently hoping that Spike will restrain himself, Buffy struggles and pleads, throwing him off physically just at the last moment. Only afterwards does Spike seem to recognize that he has attempted to rape her. This episode is the turning point in Spike's journey because in it he finally recognizes his own wrongdoings, truly sees his own darkness. As Barbara Hardy says in her discussion of the conversion pattern in Dickens, the character is converted by seeing and understanding his defect and its origins. Spike's attack on Buffy represents his attack on all his earlier victims, and the horror is brought home. We're not allowed to distance the evil he has caused. Once again, Buffy could say to her vampire lover, I know everything you did because you did it to me. Once again, in a very different way, Buffy takes the pain for all of us. For us all. Thus, the difficulty of forgiveness, so easily recommended as a moral choice, is made very real in the series. After the attempted rape, Buffy's reaction is shown mainly through language in her painful conversation with her friend Xander, but Spike's is shown as in visual representation of his thoughts, flashbacks of his memories of Buffy's struggle, and the discordant music suggests the memories horrify him. Yeah, anyway. And then a little bit further, good or evil must be seen in terms of relationship with others, not absolutes of action. For Spike, Buffy is no longer just an object, just vampire food, or a slayer to conquer, or even just a sexual object. It's and then she knows as well the very specific thing that he has left behind his jacket, which I think a few places note, which is obviously the spoils of his killing of Nikki Woods, and is a very cherished possession to him, and he casually leaves it behind in the wake of this. I think that's just like, I thought that was like, it was a nice pulling together of all the different aspects of it and interpretation of it. I don't think it's full, but I think it's somewhat useful. Anyway, yeah. I think
just before we move on from this, I think it's important to note as well that it might be obvious, but I don't feel this scene, because the scene reflects on or impinges on or negatively Classlight on Buffy in any way. I think it is primarily a scene about Spike, and that is not a good thing in some ways, but it's also she, as Ron Wilcox illustrates there, is being used as a cipher for paying for something else,
as she is throughout the show. And
I think she's done absolutely dirty through this season. Like, she is like punished and vilified and criticized in ways that I genuinely, both narrative within the show and out of the show, I think are so unfair.
Yeah, it is unfair, and it's in some ways I think it's useful in the sense that, like, you come to a Buffy by the end of season 7 who is so powerful.
Yeah.
And that is our worth in it, but it's hard gotten, and it is important at this point to also bear in mind that season 6 and 7 are a two-parter. You know,
yeah.
They're going hand in hand. They were the only point at which they got to plot 2 seasons at a time, because they knew that they had the renewal for season 7 when they were writing season 6. So that kind of does imply. Anyway, yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know.
I think there are useful, interesting things there. I think there are effective things. I'm sure that I think it's something which I kind of feel like almost if you have a personal not experience, but a personal perspective on this scene, or it makes you react in a certain way, it's kind of one of these things where, like, all that's valid. Like, you can't disagree with it critically. It's a very visceral thing.
I disagree with some people critically, because Mark Field does note that apparently one of the reactions at the time was to blame Buffy.
Okay, well, that's trash. That's objectively trash.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the kind of thing that you'd get anymore, thankfully. But it was like,
gosh.
It was like, Buffy, has invited Spike to treat her violently throughout the season, so he can't know in the situation, and blah blah blah.
I shouldn't be so actively shocked, but I'm genuinely shocked by that.
Just of course. I mean, and I hope that it's one of those situations where, like, 3 people posted that on a comments board, 800 people posted opposite, and then 1,000 more read it and disagreed. But, like, just anyone having the specifically sitting there and being like, well, maybe maybe Buffy.
Have you seen the show?
Yeah.
So I think we can go through this to the next kind of volatile element of the show, which
let's get it all done now.
No, which I think kind of not pairs, but like falls on well, which I want to talk about, which is Warren and his misogyny and how it comes through in this episode, because I think this is a counterpoint to the stuff with Spike, because people look back and are like, we hate the trio, Warren's gross, terrible person, terrible man, all this kind of stuff. Absolutely true. And that is, but the way they execute it is actually really valuable, I think, and it comes together in a way which is worth the harm it causes to the characters and to the viewer.
I think so too. I think that Warren's misogyny is one of the best points of this season. I think it is one of the most notable and like notable undercurrents that exist throughout this, like, because it's introduced so passively into the season through that nerd culture and through the objectification of women and through seeing them as, like, you know, Princess
Leia and the Slave Bikini and so on. Yeah,
1000% that. And when it gets to this point where it's like he hasn't changed his tone when he's saying say goodnight, bitch, which say goodnight, telling my Buffy say goodnight, bitch, referring to her as bitch with that horror, like that just disgusting
smarmy self-satisfaction, all this kind of
just
stuff.
But you know there are a few things which are more stomach churning than a man calling a woman a bitch with vitriol. It is just one of those things that, like, I think anyone will find it difficult to hear, but hearing him say that to Buffy the Vampire Slayer is just like, and feeling like, you know, oh, this has been seeded through this, and her being able to deal with it because that's what she deals with. I think the nerdness and the misogyny of this season works in the year 2021, you know? Yeah,
because something, absolutely, and I think it's so much even more salient. I think it really, like, this has been there for a long time in these kind of subcultures and in male subcultures and toxic masculinity, all that kind of stuff, but it's become so much more prevalent and more visible in kind of a similar way to the kind of the issues around sexual assault have become much more understood in the mainstream than they were, you know. And this kind of incel nerd culture kind of stuff, it's much more like, it's not just like the boys being boys and nerds being nerds. It's like, no, these three men, these archetypes of Warren, who is like dying in the wall from his first encounter, is just a horrible misogynist, a horrible person, and we laugh it off because he's kind of a loser as well. And then Andrew, who I have a lot more, I think I'm going to have to think and say about, because he's massively an enabler, and massively, like, he is. I felt in this, like, we have to come to Andrew more, because his gayness is not a
potential suggestion. It is clear in this episode.
It's not a suggestion. It's absolutely clear in this episode, and I don't know why we ever thought it was kind of only implied, you know. And then Jonathan, as, like, definitely part of this as well, and has done some, like, if we want to take the other episodes more seriously, has done some terrible things as well, but also
recognizes the line that he is crossing but is trying not to. Yeah,
and because he is more maybe reasonable than the other two are rational, he is left out in a lot of ways, and how there is that pressure that if he was more sexist and more misogynistic and more in tune with them, that he'd be more included, and there's all this kind of pressure there.
He's valuable to write in here, because I think, you know, nerd culture is often a gateway into misogyny for men who otherwise wouldn't be so inclined. You know, when you put them in a room and there are other men, there's a strong voice in the room saying women are crap because they keep excluding me, and you're kind of feeling like, oh, well, I feel like, you know, I am excluded, but I don't hate because of it, or I don't, like, you know, make that part of my deep ingrained identity. And you have that person, like, that is, like, that's the in for what's his name, Jonathan. That's the in for Jonathan, is, like, you know, being led, and I think that's probably a very common experience. And additionally, I mean, I there are a few things I hate more than people suggesting that misogyny in men is because they're secretly gay. It is one of my least favorite things in the world. But I would suggest that, like, you know, there's definitely, you know, as queer people who are trying to hide your identity, you definitely, like, people often, I don't think I ever did this, I came out when I was quite young, so I'm not sure, But I think people definitely do this thing where to fit in with the lads, you'll certainly ape their behavior, and maybe you will.
Yeah, I think trying to fit in and aping objectively, like what the horror isn't quite as far as I want to go on this particular point, but like objectively bad things to do is not the same thing as there's there's not a causation that if you're in the closet you are a misogynist.
Yeah.
You know, actually, just again, we've probably mentioned it before. Two things which even some of the most progressive or liberal-minded people, Chris Evans, who let us down here, but that closeted people are closeted men specifically are inherently misogynist or frequently misogynist by virtue of that, or that people in the world who are homophobic are secretly gay is so harmful and so counterproductive and so
also inaccurate
and
like, you know, yes, people are homophobic. Some of them are gay because have you noticed fucking like all of like heteronormative culture is homophobic. So highlighting one person and being like probably gay is not only showing that you think that person is like you're saying, oh lol, gay, you know, ultimately you're saying, oh, bad thing, gay, so you probably that too. And also like highlight the fact that like maybe try highlighting the fact that like the entirety of heteronormative society that we're all born and grow up in is deeply homophobic.
And like if you follow that through line, it's like, oh well, you know, these people are just homophobic because they hate themselves so much that they want to project it outwards, or they're so hypocritical. It's like, yeah, but like why, dog? Like why do they feel like that? Anyway, look, it's a whole thing, but like it's so
maybe these people are experiencing internalized homophobia. You know who else experiences homophobia? Everyone fucking else. You know, like well done.
Another problem in logic that we need to eradicate, but here with Warren, it's a real through line. It's a real like literally how he's introduced with April. And there's elements of that we treat, and we're invited to treat as kind of jokey or they're pathetic, etc. But the thing with Warren is he's so explicit that the issue he has with Buffy, who doesn't really know who he is, or no one really cares what they're doing, the fact that she exists makes him feel smaller. Like when he gets these orbs of nuzzling or whatever, it's about trying to be as strong as she is so he can hurt her. And when he goes to the bronze and he's specifically finds the girlfriend of the guy bullying him in school, it's about he's going to hurt these men, and there is an element that he is going to take this woman from the man, and whether she likes it or not, which again ties into like all that kind of similar stuff.
And also this understanding that like these women are with these men because they are hurt, because like Warren was hurt in school by this guy. This girl is with this guy, therefore his hurt must be related to the reason this woman is with this guy. So, you know, if he also hurts, then women will want to be with him too. And it's like, well, no, you're fucking desperate for one thing, but also you know, women are people who have like, you know, are able to decide things for themselves and do not see your pain as being determinative of their relationship choices. You fucking dope. Yeah.
But I think that well, I will say, just sidebar, two of the in quite a serious episode, two of the greatest moments of comedy in this show have to be one when Warren says goodnight bitch, and then she like roundhouse kicks him and says goodnight bitch.
Wonderful.
Great, very cathartic. I do enjoy it. And also when Andrew tries to take off with the jetpack and it just smashes into the low hanging ceiling.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Genuine, and it's an element of like relief as well. Like,
it is.
You know.
Anya's scene is also quite comedic, where she's talking to the woman who she's trying to persuade to do like vengeance. And the woman repeatedly wishes for things, and Anya's too busy ranting about Xander, and it's just another Emma Caulfield wonderful moment.
That's actually a really weird scene because she doesn't interact with anyone else in the Scoobies in the episode. It's a completely self-contained scene.
Yeah. No, you're actually right. That's a good point. Okay, so we need to move on because we are running way over. The other massive thing here is the killing of our gays. So Kill Your Gays is one of the original TV. Bury Your Gays is Kill Your Darlings, Bury Your Gays. We're wild and wicked, we won't give in. But the burying your gays trope is one of the original things highlighted on TV tropes. It is very much a TV tropes thing. So it's criticism via the internet, you know, and via mass experiences of this thing, people realizing, why does this constantly happen? So the idea is that like when you have queer people in a show or a movie or a book, that one of them is going to die because the perception of queer people is that we are perpetually unhappy and doomed to unhappiness to some degree. There are various reasons, various ways in which this is done. And like if you look at say Brokeback Mountain, I would claim to be one of the best queer movies of all time. Absolutely does that. If you look at A Single Man, like hugely does that. And
death is our gift. That's kind of
yeah. It's a funny one because we've talked about this many a time. I'm not sure why I said many a time. We've talked about this lots. Which is that like there are. I would suggest that the individual instances of burying of gays are reasonably genuine usually. Like look at Adventure Zone.
What gay was killed on Adventure Time?
You're right. The gays in Adventure Time are very happy. Actually, one of them is dead though. She's a vampire.
Yeah, she started off dead though.
True. So if you look at the Adventure Zone, which is the McElroy Brothers podcast, there's a queer couple. They die, and people were like, "Why would you bury your gays?" Or like when we were very concerned with watching Fear Street, it doesn't bury its gays, and we were like, "Wonderful." So at the same time, if you look at like Adventure Zone, it was a reasonable and good narrative thing there. It wasn't hateful, it wasn't mean, but it is playing into a sad and unfortunate and consistent cliche and stereotype and consistent pattern, which is damaging in some small way or some large way to queer people experiencing the narratives.
Like you watch the narrative and you don't get too attached to the character the first time you watch it because you're afraid they're going to die.
Yep.
That is an actual experience. I certainly have watched them. Like it was a couple of Doctor Who episodes last year which had very prominent men, married men as main characters, which in itself is kind of like strange. And the whole time I was like, yeah, but they're going to get killed in the last 2 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So like, so yeah, it's actually it's very relevant to this episode because I say two of the most foundational TV tropes are the bury your gays and fridging. And fridging being
killing a woman to advance another character's storyline. Usually a man. Usually a man,
yeah. It comes, if I remember correctly, it was from the Green Arrow finding his girlfriend's head in a fridge. Boggy, okay.
Yeah.
And all of this ties up together. So we have Tara and Willow. And actually, I will confess, I actually looked away during the credits and I didn't actually see Amber Benson in the credits.
I didn't either. I didn't notice it. I felt bad.
But
I think specifically that note. So this episode is the first and only episode in which Amber Benson is credited as a lead actor or a main character, and it's before she's immediately killed.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people saw that as goading and mean, and like I think it invited a lot of bitterness.
Yeah, I think there's reason to be bitter about all this stuff, and I think part of it comes from, even though majority straight writers understand, it's sad that the character like killed off, and it's good that we have a gay character and all that kind of stuff, I don't think the average straight writer understands how incredibly precious and valuable it is to see people like us on screen. Yep. So you have any number of characters, not specifically I think in Buffy, but like you can kill off and kind of they're all weighted differently, but it's like, no, we're like, this is the one, this is the reason for a lot, maybe it's the reason we're here. You know what I mean? But, and this is again is something which people who are Buffy fans will have different opinions on. I have spent a lot of time thinking about Willow and Tara over the years, and I think you make a great point, which is that collectively the experience that gay people tend to die on these TV shows and on these films is bad. And in some cases it's really egregiously obvious. But it does not mean that a gay person shouldn't die on a TV show. And particularly in genre TV, where if you have value or action, if you're a protagonist, people die in these shows. Buffy's died twice, etc. All that kind of stuff.
Or Anya dies at the end of
Anya dies, exactly. We come to Willow and Tara. Before we even get to her death, positives is in this episode, even before she dies, we talk about the fact that it's bad that she dies and it's cruel and all that. Given that in the 5th season we were it was surprising to see them kiss at all on a network TV show. This is actually this is an episode that reeks as queer joy. Like, they spend a lot of time in bed. There's a lot of sexuality between them. There's a lot of genuine affection. They are one of the strongest relationships that ever happened on this show. And I was struck. I was like, okay, well, I'm actually quite happy that I'm seeing this. Before forgetting about the end of the episode, this is actually really good that this happened. And this show has often and always been about these deaths or these traumas and these tragedies and things being taken away and all that. And I have to say, there wasn't another couple or another character that this could have happened to. You know, this is where the tragedy can happen. I think it is a shame and a waste in some ways that you have a queer couple that could have gone through to the end of the show that isn't there now. But I do think that the arc for Tara and for Willow having this recovery and then falling to magic, and it being a counterpoint to the whole warring stuff, I think it's good television, and I think it's good narratively, and I think it works.
Yeah, and I think Dark Willow is like one of the most fascinating things this show ever does, and we'll discuss it at length in the upcoming episodes. But that moment at the end of this episode where, you know, you really do at this point in the show feel like Willow has been struggling to do this magic stuff, even though it's such a messy metaphor by this point. The absolute despair that she experiences at the end of this episode, and the immediate response of queer magic rage is fascinating, and it's absolutely makes for good TV. And like, you know, I was like sitting around being like, maybe we could just watch the next episode now. Important to bear in mind, like the end of season 6 is fascinating. From the episode on, the whole series, like the rest of the series, takes place over 24 hours, and it is a rush, and it's scary.
I felt that flush of new television where I was like, it felt like I wasn't watching an old episode of Buffy. I felt that like this was happening now. And as I said to you, and we were kind of talking about this previously, it's not a cheap storyline. Like, Willow and Tara get a lot of time. This happens organically. It brings it to a point where it has the most impact, and you do kind of, it leaves you feeling like, God, maybe Willow should just burn it all down. And it makes her one of the ultimately most interesting villains that's ever on this show, because she's not wrong in so many ways. It's so relatable. No, absolutely. And it is ultimately, you know, does it feel mean? Yeah, it does. A lot of things in the show has felt mean. Look at Buffy losing her virginity, and in a deeply affectionate moment, and that leading her to the most trauma she ever experiences. Is that like, are we suggesting that, like, you know, maybe the show is exhibiting multiple instances of just misogyny in the way it does that? Maybe. I don't think so, though. I think that a lot of those things are shown because they're communicating something very important about these characters, about these people. And it's the other side of having a show that is about, you know, chaos and danger, and having so many women in it, that if a woman is hurt, is emblematic of all hurt to women or irresponsible. But no, I don't. Like, I mean, that's it. You hit the nail on the head. Like, how many major men in this show are there? It's like Spike, Angel, Xander, and Giles. Yeah, Xander's quite a minor man, let's be honest.
Yeah, Angel, Spike, and Giles all experience major trauma in this show. I would say, and then, you know, Buffy, Willow, Tara,
and Xander, because like with the wedding stuff to a degree, but also, which is his own fault. But like, Anya dies at the end of the show, so like,
yeah, but he doesn't really note it. You know,
That's true. That's fair.
Anyway, I just think it's reasonably distributed. Anyway, I don't take points off this episode for the queer stuff, personally. I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say this episode is really good. I think it is really fascinating, very scary. It was not enjoyable to watch, but the watching of it was compelling, scary, literarily had a lot of worth, and in terms of the show's progression had a ton of worth. But I would say the rape content definitely knocks points off it.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so fucking petty, but you know what I mean.
No, like really what we kind of say, what we say glibly, we mean in earnest, which is that the way the rape stuff is handled weakens it as an episode and makes it less valuable, and makes it. You know, it's not just like it's not transactional. It's not just a value. Like, it makes it like a less good thing to exist. You know, and to experience.
Yeah, the way it's specifically in the way it's handled. I think there is an alternate version of the show where you actually fully explore that. They don't, and it's lesser because of it.
Yeah, it's because it is partially because it kind of glances off of it. Like, I'm not saying it should be over this length of time, but the way I don't feel as bothered by the Tara stuff is like something that is explored both in the run up and the aftermath.
Yeah, and
substantially.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the stuff with Spike and Buffy in this episode isn't given that same credence.
I think they realized the mistake they'd made, and they were like, "We can't sit on this. It was too much."
Yeah.
Okay. Let's quickly just note that Xander in this episode is an absolute bastard.
Yeah.
He
up to and including like when he burst in on Buffy in the bathroom, like I could
murdered that man.
Throttle him. Yeah.
Like, I've never felt so much rage towards a character, because like obviously doing this fucking podcast means a different experience of like watching this show, having to discuss it at length, having to be the Xander Harris hate cast, you know, is a different pressure. And watching in that moment, and like Buffy being in so much pain of like because she's being shellacked by him previous in the episode for no fucking reason, huh?
Great word.
Thanks. For no fucking reason, he was just being an absolute asshole to her. Where he thinks that, you know, he's like, "Oh, why did you shut me out?" And what he's trying, really, the way it's portrayed is more like, why is Xander still here? For one thing, in the characters. Secondly, Buffy rejected Xander. Why would she sleep with Spike then? And thirdly, you know, just this general sense of,
do you mean Anya?
No. I think Xander is far more disgusted at Buffy sleeping with Spike than with Anya sleeping with Spike.
Because of how it reflects on, or it makes him feel personally, basically.
Yeah, and also, like, you know, he makes him feel personally about how he has felt rejected by Buffy in the past, how he feels ownership towards Buffy, and all these things. And it makes for gross content. Thankfully, by the end of the episode, he does note that, like, Buffy says, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Spike," and Xander says, "Yeah, I suppose, you know, if I hadn't made it so clear that I'd be an absolute asshole about it, then you might have been able to tell me." And it's like, yeah, she shouldn't have to apologize for you to admit that.
I think if we want to be charitable to Xander as a narrative component, he is the fourth trio in some ways. Like, it is noted that this is the kind of person he could have been if he didn't have kind of strong female influences in his life, you know? Mm-hmm. But he does carry that element of like me, you know? Yeah. And up to and including like when he comes, he's just so like annoying. He's so rude to her while he's sitting in his apartment at noon drinking and she's trying to be nice to him. But up to including the end of the episode where they're reconciling, Warren comes around with the gun and she pushes him out of the way. That's why she takes the bullet. She saves him. Like she is pure. She's
pure. And you know what? This episode removes Buffy from the storyline, which I really, really don't appreciate. Anyway, in the sense that, like, you know, it just feels like Buffy isn't as present in this episode. You know, it feels like it's about Xander, it's about Willow, it's about Tara, it's about Warren, and Buffy is consistently there. I'm sorry, about Spike, of course. Buffy's consistently there, but she is just a what you call those things, a matrix through which everything else is understood. But yeah, no, I'm like at the point where Xander crashes in through that bathroom door, he's given out to her extensively. She's been physically injured, and like Spike attempted to rape her, and he comes in and is like, "How dare you have Spike's coat in your house?
Why are you in my house? Why are people always in Buffy's house?"
Anyway, okay, we need to move on to the
why don't they just pay rent?
We did watch Rent over the weekend. It was a fucking awful idea.
Well, if we talk about it in future, but Rent is not aged as well.
I love that movie and I hate it so much. Okay. So some Buffy Bits for you, Joel. Apparently the shot with the blood required Alison Hannigan to they only had 2 copies of this shirt that she could wear. And I think it's very interesting that, like, you know, I think the seeing red, the title obviously refers to her seeing red at the end of the episode. It refers to Spike seeing red. But I think it also refers to Tara seeing red, because her last phrase being your shirt. because she has just seen red on Willow, and I think that's kind of very sad and upsetting. But the splatter, they had to repeatedly do it to get the right splatter, but they only had 2 copies of the shirt, so Alison Hannigan was constantly standing there in a wet t-shirt or wet shirt trying to get this, when they were trying to get the splatter right. Apparently by the end of it, she did not care about her acting at all. She was just like, oh, is this splatter good? Great, let's go on. I think it's a funny note. So yeah, we know that there's lots of content cut for Sky One in this episode. And then also, I thought it was notable that Azure Ray, who are a band who are kind of active in the mid-noughties, early noughties, who were on, it wasn't Team Love, it was Saddle Creek Records, I think. So it would have been kind of like similar, they would have crossed over a lot with Bright Eyes and Cursive and stuff like that. Their song's playing while Xander is sad. But it's just a good song, and I just like Azure Ray. And then, Mark Field also notes that the Angel episode this week talks about the price of doing dark and deep magic, and suggests that the price of bringing Buffy back is not, when Willow kills that deer, the price is not the monster that they bring through in Afterlife. The price is Tara, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Joel, do you have any Buffy bits for me there?
Yeah, so I suppose just a rasher from the rest of the episode that we couldn't get to. When Dawn went to visit Spike in the crypt, I thought it was funny that she does literally the same church lady thing that Buffy does when she goes to Faith. Like, she is dressed in her Sunday best and is kind of going to like protestize to him. There's also the scene where Buffy finds their lair in, I have to assume it's some abandoned house or something. I didn't really clarify where the trio's lair is, and they have actual like saws set up to attack her. And I'm like, hey, how would that work? And it must be so much effort. But also, she does a really cool backflip to get out of it. Like, you're just so blasé about it later on. She's like, oh yeah, there was saws, yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that that woman hits on Xander in the bar, and it's just like this constant portrayal in media of like women who are actual supermodels hitting on the most dull looking men of all time, because it was just like, why would this woman be interested in Xander at all?
Yeah, and just otherwise, I suppose just to note that like Per Dawn has a very destructive lifestyle, doesn't she? Like, from a social welfare point of view, it's like or child protection point of view, it's like, yeah, like these, you know, the whole Spike and Buffy stuff happening around her. Her good friend Tara is now back in the house, and then it's like, oh, Spike isn't going to be around anymore, is he? It's like this child has like no consistent adults in her life, to be fair.
Yeah. The fact that like in this episode she's like, oh, Tara and Willow, you better not stop having sex or
she's facilitating their sex,
being in love, and it's just like, it's so desperate. Anyway, I also have a note here, which is just like the conversation Buffy has with Xander, where she says, "You don't know how hard it's been," and he says, "What, lying to me?" And it's just like, fuck yourself, honestly. Okay, fashion notes. I would say that both Alison Hannigan and Amber Benson and Alison Hannigan both look wonderful in the episode. Specifically at the beginning of the episode, they look so fresh and so like just young and in love, and it's just very nice to see.
I literally have the exact same note, that I think they look wonderful and they look so vivacious and full of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite liked Willow's 78 shirt. I thought it was very lesbian culture. I thought the cut on Buffy's leather jacket was very painful.
Rip.
Yeah. But I thought that the black stealth suits that the trio are wearing are like ridiculous and funny.
It makes it look like they have 80s style Dynasty shoulder packs because they have the jetpack on underneath.
And I enjoyed Buffy's like classic, you know, serious demure going to beat someone up outfit, which is like always with like a beanie hat on and or I'm not sure what a beanie is really, but a knitted hat on and like a beige overcoat. And it's just always like, if she's wearing a beige overcoat, she's probably going to kill you. And then I also thought that what Xander's wearing at the end of the episode, which is like a cream shirt, is one of the biggest cream shirts he's ever worn in this show, and it looks awful. Apparently as well, the shirt that Tara is wearing when she gets shot is the one that Willow was trying to find to go to Joyce's funeral. So that's interesting. Okay, do you have any fashion notes, Joe?
No, you actually comprehensively cover everything I wanted to include there.
It's almost like we have similar thought patterns or something. Okay. Do you ever think that maybe we missed a beat with doing this podcast, in the sense that like we just agree with each other all the time? Like, aren't you supposed to, like, isn't the classic podcast format supposed to be one person and they conflict in some way, or they disagree?
Well, like, we're already like two cis white men doing a podcast. Like, it's slightly doomed to start with, you know.
It's true.
And that tragedy is compelling.
Joel, what's your rating? Oh, sorry, what's death count?
So one Nesla demon, cattle progged to death by the trio. One Nesla demon whose neck is snapped by Warren. One vampire staked by Buffy, who does a cool high kick as he's been dusted. And Tara McClay accidentally shot by Warren Mears with a gun.
And we must know that this episode does leave our heroine shot and bleeding out in her garden, so hopefully that turns out okay.
Yeah, I actually have to say I completely overlooked the fact that Buffy also gets shot in this episode. Yeah.
So, Joe, what would you rate this episode? And bearing in mind that, like, you know, and this episode is the most unrateable episode for the season. Yeah.
It's a tricky one. I think I will give this episode probably a 9.1.
9.1 what?
9.1 crumpled bed sheets out of 10.
That's higher than I was expecting.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one to rate.
Yeah.
Why I think it's worth, like, we never actually discussed what are we rating.
No, I know. Like, would you excise this episode from the Buffy canon?
No, I think it's valuable. I think it's really the rest of the show turns on this episode in so many ways, and I think that the queer joy that we see with Willow and Tara is wonderful. I think that while painful as a queer person to lose Tara, I think that the arc that they have, they get some of the best character development and some of the best arcs in the whole show. You know,
it is painful because we've been enjoying Tara's presence so much in this season.
I think really second only to Buffy, probably. I think Willow gets the best character development over the course of the show.
Agreed.
I think that the stuff with the trio, as annoying as they are on kind of first principles, I think this episode really makes the rest of the season worth it, because it really kind of clarifies, like, oh no, we really are saying that Warring is like this, the trio are like this, and men are often like this, and we're really actually making that the villain of the season. Yeah. I think that the
villain of the season is misogyny, and the crucial point of this season of this show, which is one of the most important feminist shows of all time. And definitely, we can talk about the feminism of Buffy, like, till the cows come home, but like, as in, like, you know, it's problematizing nature and all this stuff, and it's failure in these modern times. But, like, you know, one of its seasons saying the thing we need to deal with now is reining in the absolute pain and fury that this misogyny has wrought upon us. Yeah. Is something that we need to talk, or not that, like, it is, like, it's a factor. It's, like, I think that's fascinating. And
I would say, just in terms of ratings, I think there's almost any rating that anyone else would have, I would kind of, like, not disagree with. I think for me, the rating is very personal. In watching this, was I engaged? Did I get something from it? Do I think it adds value to the Buffy story overall? Obviously, the stuff with Buffy and Spike, I think brings it down to a huge degree. I don't think that has as much worth as the other elements of the episode. I don't think it's well handled. Yeah. But I think it's a very important episode of Buffy, and I think it has some things in it to say that we still haven't gotten a great answer to, or like we haven't. There's no definitive answer yet. You know. Yeah. So yeah. 9.1 for me. Cool. I'm going to give it an 8.8 intimate spidey relations out of 10. I would definitely agree with all you said there. I think, you know, it maybe lacks a really brilliance for me in some ways. You know, I think that I think representation and responsibility in media kind of sits apart from worth artistically and story-wise in some distinct ways, and then is interlinked in lots of other ways. It's a messy thing, and I think, like, you know, I wouldn't remove this episode from the show. I would change how they handle some things, but like, it's one of the most notable episodes. I think it goes quite weirdly hand in hand with passion as well.
in a really interesting way. But anyway, so yeah, gosh, that was rough.
Yeah.
Oh, now we need to talk about the Cordelia chase.
Oh, I will actually take this briefly because it's not a particularly significant episode, Angel. The episode is The Price.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, there's some thematic links to Buffy. They have essentially a situation where some quite cool kind of sci-fi-ish insect demons, really transparent demons, are released into the hotel and infect one civilian who walks in and turns him into kind of a Waters of Mars type alien, desperate for very thirsty, needs liquid, and eventually turns them into salt when they don't get it. And then we kind of have a hunt down the alien in the hotel episode, linked with Fred gets infected by the alien, and there's kind of a whole thing about that. It's linked to Buffy insofar as these aliens are a result of thaumaturgy, which is the same thing you mentioned from when Buffy was resurrected. A demon that's created, or a monster that's created as a direct result of a powerful dark spell. So this is the result of kind of Angel using the spell to summon Sajang. And really it's a question about a number of things. What is the price of what he's doing? He's so kind of hell-bent on finding Connor, and everyone's like, Connor's probably dead, and you need to deal with at least in a rational or a realistic way, etc. It has grew realizing that Cordelia is really fixated on Angel, and Angel's her main priority, and this is the start of him leaving, essentially. And just a lot of discussion on kind of what different people will do for the cause, essentially, to fight the good fight. And I suppose the narratively significant moments being that at the end we have Cordelia using tremendous godlike powers to incinerate all of the demons, and it's because she is on the path to becoming a higher being and is going to ascend essentially at the end of the season. And then the dramatic moment, which is really reasonably well executed, that everything is foretelling the coming of a great evil or a great danger. And Angel's like, okay, well, how long do we have? And Fred is like, no, it's literally right now. A portal opens, a big CGI monster comes through, which they think is the foretold destroyer. But what actually follows it is a human, Vincent Kartheiser. A human monster hunter that kills the monster, and the episode ends with the now introduced character being like, hello, Dad, and Connor has grown up, essentially.
Yeah, and another important note there is that Wesley is brought back to help Fred because he's been abandoned by his friends by this point. I think unfairly, personally, but anyway, and he's asked to help Fred buy gun in an interesting moment. And
so I enjoy it as a Monster Week episode. I like the aliens. I think the Connor twist, Connor, it's effective twist. He's an annoying character at times, but it's an effective twist.
I have so much less time for Connor than I do for Dawn, I must say.
Yeah, it's fair. So I'd probably give this 7 failed feminist gestures. It was
same.
It's fun Monster Week episode. Taking along nicely here, but I do like when there are kind of thematic mirrors with the stuff in Buffy.
And season 3 of Angel is just good fun. Even at its worst.
So we come to the end of our episode. Thank you for coming on this journey with us. I hope there was some interesting stuff in there, some useful stuff in there, and some things to chew on. And I enjoy watching the episode with you, and Brian, I enjoy watching the episode and discussing it with our listeners. So
send us a tweet. Send us your thoughts about this. I want to hear about what your thoughts are, because I guarantee that it's a funny one. I think everyone has strong feelings about this. Do you want Seeing Red to not exist? How do you fit into your Buffiness? Because Buffy is such an overriding character moment for so many people, in the sense that some people are so indebted to it in terms of how much they they engage with it and they emote with it, how much they've made it part of their lexicon, how much they've made it part of their just daily watching experiences and stuff. And this episode is just so rough. What's your thoughts?
Let us know, and if we're wrong, we're sorry. Which is something I think people should say in podcasts more often. But no, thanks for taking this time with us, and we hope you have a good week.
Have a good week. Go watch a bad Disney movie.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell your closeted gay sidekick who's secretly in love with you, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
My closeted gay sidekick who's secretly in love with me is Booker.
See you.
Bye.